Most people get this completely wrong. They think if someone looks calm, distant, hard to read, then there must not be much happening inside. But that is exactly where the illusion begins. Some of the most emotionally intense people you will ever meet are the ones who show the least on the surface. And when that pressure finally finds a place to escape, it does not come out softly. It comes out with force. It comes out through chemistry, heat, obsession, closeness that feels almost unreal. That is why so many people get pulled in fast and then blindsided later, because what feels like deep connection can actually be controlled release. What feels like a promise can be a moment. And if you do not understand this pattern, you will keep calling it destiny when it is really distance and intensity taking turns. Stay with me, because once you see this, you cannot unsee it. And by the end, you will understand why these connections can feel so powerful, why they confuse so many people, and why the part that breaks people is not the passion, it is the inconsistency that follows it. When you start to understand avoidance, you have to begin with one simple truth. Hiding emotion does not erase it, it strengthens it, it compresses it, it stores it under pressure. And anything stored under pressure will eventually search for a way out. The biggest mistake people make is assuming that because someone with an avoidant pattern seems steady, detached, or almost untouched on the outside, there is not much going on underneath. In many cases, the opposite is true. These are not people who feel less. They are often people who learned very early that showing emotion was unsafe, useless, or even dangerous. So they built an inner system. They learned to regulate, contain, and manage everything alone. Over time, that becomes identity. Strong, independent, composed, in control. But that control has a price. Feelings that are never processed do not disappear. They collect, they stack, they sit in the body and the mind waiting for an opening. And this is where things become interesting. That stored emotional energy does not stay quiet forever. It needs a channel. It needs a place where it can come out without triggering the deeper fear of being emotionally exposed. For many people with avoidant patterns, physical intimacy becomes that channel. Why? Because it has structure. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It exists inside a clearer frame. The roles are easier to read. The rules feel more stable. There is an unspoken agreement. We can be close here, but only like this, and only for now. That can feel safer than emotional closeness. It lets them touch intensity without feeling like they are losing control. And that is exactly why the experience can feel so powerful, so sudden, so hard to forget. When they enter that space, all the emotion they do not easily show in daily life can rise at once. Desire, passion, longing, tenderness, even warmth they rarely express in normal conversation. To the other person, it can feel electric, not just attractive, not just exciting. It can feel deeper than anything they have known before, because it is not only chemistry, it is the release of something that has been building for a long time. But here is the part most people do not understand. That intensity is real, but it is not the same thing as emotional availability. It does not automatically mean they are open, ready, or able to sustain that level of closeness outside that moment. It only means this is one of the few spaces where the guard drops for a little while. Not because fear is gone, but because the moment feels contained. And that creates a very powerful illusion. The partner starts thinking, this is the real them. This is who they are underneath. This is what we could be all the time if they would just stay here. But outside that protected space, the old defenses return, the distance comes back, the restraint returns, the same walls go back up. And the contrast between those two states, the heat and then the coolness, the closeness and then the withdrawal, becomes sharper than ever. That is why people say these connections feel unforgettable. What they are often feeling is not stable intimacy. It is compressed emotion spilling through the only door that feels safe enough to open. And if you do not understand that difference, you will misread the signal every time. You will take intensity as invitation. You will take passion as promise. You will take a powerful moment and turn it into a story about where the relationship is going. But intensity without integration does not create secure connection. It creates confusion, and this is where the next layer matters. For someone with this pattern, physical closeness can become more than pleasure. It becomes strategic, not fake, not always manipulative, but deeply psychological. It is one of the few places where they can enter closeness without facing the full threat that emotional intimacy creates inside them. For most people, vulnerability is emotional first. It means being seen, being known, letting someone into your fears, your needs, your insecurities, your softer places. That kind of openness carries uncertainty. It opens the door to judgment, rejection, disappointment, and for the avoidant mind, something even more frightening, the fear of losing autonomy. So they protect against it. They keep things light. They shift the subject. They go silent when things get too real. But physical intimacy is different. It offers vulnerability in the body, not always in words. It is immediate, not prolonged. You can be present without explaining yourself. You can be engaged without unpacking your history. You can show desire without handing over the keys to your inner world. And for someone who equates control with safety, that difference changes everything. So what happens is this. In that moment, they may become fully present. Sometimes more present than people who are very expressive everywhere else in life. Their focus sharpens, their energy narrows, everything is concentrated. To the other person, it can feel extraordinary, like this person is completely here with me, like nothing is missing, like I have reached them at last. And in that moment, they may be completely there. But presence is not the same as openness. That is the trap. The partner feels the closeness and assumes it means emotional depth everywhere else too. They think, if this person can meet me like this here, then surely they can meet me like this in real life, in conversation, in conflict, in commitment, in ordinary days. But the rules are not the same. The intimacy exists inside a compartment. It is allowed here, but it does not automatically continue outside this frame. And once the moment passes, access often closes. They return to the more familiar version of themselves, regulated, self-contained, emotionally protected. Not because the moment meant nothing, but because sustaining that same openness outside a controlled space feels too overwhelming. It threatens independence, it stirs fear, it creates pressure, and then the partner feels the psychological whiplash. One moment there is closeness, heat, even what feels like fusion. The next there is distance, silence, vagueness, or a subtle emotional fog. Naturally, the partner tries to bridge the gap. They ask for clarity, they ask for consistency, they ask for more. And the more emotional continuity is requested, the more internal pressure the avoidant person may feel, and the more they retreat. That is the paradox. The place where they seem most open is often the very place that helps them remain emotionally protected. It is vulnerability, but with limits. Closeness, but with an exit already built in. And unless you see that clearly, you will keep translating physical intensity into emotional commitment. You will assume the deepest moments mean a broader readiness for connection, when in reality, it may only be the one place that level of closeness feels manageable. That does not make it fake, it makes it specific. And once you understand that, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The rhythm itself, because this kind of connection is rarely steady, it is often cyclical. There is an emotional tide. It moves in, it moves out, and if you do not know what you are looking at, it feels random. But underneath, the mechanism is very consistent. At a distance, they feel safer. There is room, there is space, no immediate demand for emotional performance. And in that space, desire begins to come back. Curiosity comes back. Attraction rises again. Sometimes even longing grows stronger, because desire often needs room for them. It needs air. It needs absence. So they move closer, and when they move closer, it can feel sudden and very intense. They may initiate contact. They may seem warmer, more focused, more physically expressive than before. The chemistry feels stronger, the pull feels amplified, but what you are often witnessing is the release of tension built during the distance. It is not always growth, sometimes it is reaction. Now here is the crucial part. As closeness increases, internal discomfort often rises with it, because one part of them wants the connection, but another part is scanning for danger. Danger of dependence, danger of expectation, danger of losing control over their own emotional state. And the closer things get, the louder that inner alarm can become, so they pull back, sometimes quietly, slower replies, less warmth, less initiative, a shift in tone you can feel before you can explain it. Other times it is sudden and sharp, but the result is the same. Distance returns, and in that distance, they regulate again. The pressure drops, safety returns, then something starts building on both sides. For them, space restores calm, and eventually desire may return again. For the partner, the withdrawal creates confusion, anxiety, and a need to make sense of what changed. They replay everything, they wonder what they did wrong, they attach even more meaning to the intense moments because the absence around those moments makes them glow brighter in memory. Then, when the avoidant person comes back, and very often they do, the reconnection feels even stronger than before. There is relief. There is excitement. There is that powerful feeling of we found each other again. And many times that energy rushes straight back into physical intensity because it is the fastest way to close the gap without having to explain the emotional distance that created it. If this feels addictive, that is because cycles like this can train the nervous system to confuse relief with love and contrast with chemistry. Watch this closely because this is where many people lose their center. What looks like overwhelming chemistry is sometimes the body reacting to the swing between absence and presence, distance, return, withdrawal, reconnection. The brain starts pairing those emotional spikes with passion, but that is not always stability. It is often oscillation, and most people are not built for that long term because what they want is continuity. They want a bond that deepens and steadies over time. They want intimacy that grows instead of disappearing and restarting. But in this pattern, intimacy does not move in a straight line. It surges, retreats, and resurfaces. And if both people do not understand what is happening, one starts chasing clarity while the other keeps reaching for space. The danger is in naming it the wrong thing. Calling it deep compatibility when it is actually contrast, calling it destiny when it is a cycle, calling it emotional depth when it is intensity made stronger by absence. The body does not always know the difference, it only knows the high. But real connection is not measured by how intense the reunion feels. It is measured by what remains when the moment settles, what holds on an ordinary day, what survives when no one is being pulled back together by longing or lack. Because if closeness only appears after distance and intensity only arrives after withdrawal, then what you are experiencing is not a strong foundation. It is a repeated emotional pattern. And once you look deeper into that pattern, you start to see something else that is often misunderstood. What gets labeled as dominance, control, or overpowering intensity in these moments is not always about power over another person. Very often, it is about protecting the self. At the center of avoidant behavior is a specific fear, not only fear of hurt, not only fear of rejection, but fear of emotional engulfment, fear of being absorbed so deeply into closeness that they lose their separate self, their balance, their identity, their internal ground. For them, closeness can carry the risk of disappearing inside the relationship. That fear does not vanish just because the intimacy becomes physical, it simply changes form. So what do? They stay involved while trying to keep a sense of command over the pace, the structure, and the emotional temperature of the interaction. You will often notice this not as an obvious announcement, but as a subtle direction. They shape the rhythm, they decide when things speed up, they decide when things slow down. They choose when to deepen the moment and when to pull it back. Again, this is not always conscious manipulation. Often, it is an automatic strategy to stay connected without becoming overwhelmed. Because control here equals regulation. If they can guide the experience, they can remain in it without feeling lost inside it. If they can define the boundaries, they can move close to intensity without crossing into vulnerability that feels unbearable. This lets them stay at the edge of closeness, close enough to feel something real, not so close that it threatens their autonomy. And to the partner, this can feel magnetic. There is certainty in it, a strong sense of direction, a feeling of being carried into something focused and intentional. But beneath that, there can also be a quieter feeling that is harder to name, a feeling that something is still being held back. That is where many people feel torn. Part of them is pulled toward the certainty, the heat, the decisiveness of the moment. Another part senses the imbalance. Even when the physical experience feels shared, the emotional exposure may not be equal. And if that imbalance is not understood, the whole dynamic begins to shift. The partner leans in more. They try to meet what they think is already happening. They try to access the same openness outside the moment. They want words to match the feeling, consistency to match the intensity. But as soon as that shift happens, pressure rises again inside the avoidant person. They feel the relationship moving into less controlled territory, and the response is often predictable. They tighten control, or they step back, or they go quiet. So what looked like pure passion starts revealing its deeper structure, a carefully managed form of closeness where intensity is allowed, but only within limits that protect against emotional overwhelm. This does not mean the experience is false. The presence may be real, the attraction may be real, the feeling may be real, but it is filtered through the need to keep self-protection alive at all times. And that filter is exactly why many people cannot fully rest inside the connection, even when it feels powerful. Because true intimacy is not only about how deep the feeling goes in one moment, it is also about how safe both people feel without needing to control the moment at all. And when control becomes the requirement for connection, what remains is not full surrender, it is strategy wearing the face of closeness. If this is hitting hard, keep going, because the next part is where the whole illusion becomes clear. By now, the partner usually has a story forming in the mind. The intensity felt real, the presence felt undeniable, the moments carried so much charge that they seem impossible to dismiss. So the natural conclusion becomes, this must mean something deeper, but that is exactly where things begin to unravel. Most people are wired to treat intensity as proof. If something feels strong, immersive, almost overwhelming, we assign it meaning. We assume it reflects emotional investment, care, attachment, maybe even love. And in healthier, more secure dynamics, that interpretation often works because emotional and physical intimacy tend to support each other. They move together. But in an avoidant dynamic, that alignment is often broken. What you feel in those heightened moments is not always a window into stable emotional openness. Sometimes it is a release valve. It is stored energy finding expression inside very specific conditions. And because the moment feels so alive, so concentrated, so undeniably real, you begin to believe you have touched something continuous, something that exists beyond the moment itself. So you build a story, you replay the experience, you study details, you try to find proof that what was felt is reflected in how they behave afterward. And when it is not, when the intensity is not followed by clarity, when the closeness is not followed by emotional steadiness, you usually do not question the pattern first. You question yourself. Did I read too much into it? Did I ask for too much? Was I too sensitive? Was any of it real? That is where the emotional trap closes, because instead of seeing a structural mismatch in how intimacy is being experienced, you start treating the inconsistency like a puzzle you must solve. Then the focus shifts. Not from connection to truth, but from truth to pursuit. You start trying to earn continuity from moments that were never built to continue in the first place. From their side, the experience may have been genuine, but also fully contained. It existed inside that moment, without automatically meaning it would turn into steady emotional openness afterward. So when you try to deepen it, define it, or carry it into daily life, they feel the movement. Not because you are wrong, not because you have done something bad, but because now the connection is entering a space that feels less controlled, less predictable, and therefore less safe to them. That is when retreat begins again. And now you are holding two realities that do not fit neatly together. One is what you felt, intensity, closeness, something that seemed deeply meaningful. The other is what you are getting, distance, ambiguity, lack of emotional follow-through. The mind hates this kind of contradiction. It wants clean meaning. It wants a simple cause and effect. But the truth is this: intensity was not a promise. It was an experience. And once you see that, everything starts to shift. You stop using those moments as evidence of what the relationship is becoming. You start seeing them as isolated expressions that may be real without being reliable. They are not empty. They are simply limited. And the more you confuse a powerful moment with a sustainable pattern, the more you stretch meaning beyond what the reality can hold. That is why people stay too long in these loops. They are not chasing fantasy. They are trying to make emotional logic out of a connection that keeps breaking its own pattern. When you pull all of this together, the emotional suppression, the controlled vulnerability, the push and pull rhythm, the need for control, and the way intensity gets misread as depth, you begin to understand why so many people struggle with this dynamic. It is not because they are weak, and it is not because the avoidant person is always trying to be difficult. It is because the connection runs on a different logic than most people expect. Most people enter relationships believing progression should bring steadiness. They believe as connection deepens, consistency should grow too. They expect emotional closeness to rise alongside physical closeness. They assume that if something feels powerful, it will slowly become more stable. In other words, they expect a line, a path, a sense of forward movement. But with an avoidant pattern, the experience often feels contradictory. One moment there is intense presence, the next there is distance. One moment there is warmth and almost breathtaking closeness, the next there is fog, detachment, or silence. Not necessarily because the feelings were fake, but because the capacity to hold those feelings openly and steadily is limited. So what you get are peaks without a baseline, and that is where emotional strain begins, because to remain grounded in this kind of relationship, you have to hold two opposing truths at once. The intensity can be real, but not predictive. The connection can exist, but not be consistently available. The moments can matter deeply, but still fail to describe the day-to-day reality of the relationship. Most people cannot hold that contradiction for long without starting to lose themselves in it. So they adapt. Slowly, quietly, sometimes without even noticing. They become hyper-aware. They start reading tiny changes in tone, timing, and energy. They overanalyze interactions. They search for clues. They lean in harder, hoping effort will create consistency. Or they begin to pull back too, trying to protect themselves from the emotional swings. In both cases, they move away from their own center because the question changes. It is no longer, is this healthy and sustainable for me? It becomes, how do I make this work? And that question, while deeply human, often leads to self-abandonment. You begin negotiating your own needs. You start tolerating inconsistency that would not feel acceptable in any calmer context. You justify confusion because the intense moments feel so meaningful, and that is the real reason many people cannot handle this level of connection. It is not the intensity itself. People can handle intensity. It is the lack of integration, the lack of continuity between the beautiful moments and everyday reality. Without continuity, the relationship becomes emotionally disorienting. This does not mean every bond with an avoidant person is doomed. It does not mean people cannot grow. They can. Awareness matters. Responsibility matters. Healing matters. But without awareness on both sides, imbalance becomes very likely. One person adapts to the cycle. The other remains protected by it. And over time, that imbalance becomes exhausting. So the question is not whether you can survive the highs. Many people can. The deeper question is whether you can stay anchored in yourself while the highs and lows keep moving around you. Can you appreciate what is real in the moment without giving it a meaning it cannot steadily support? Can you tell the difference between a connection that excites you and one that truly supports you? Because those are not always the same thing. One can flood your body, the other can hold your life. One can make you feel chosen for a night, the other can make you feel safe over time. If you do not learn that difference, you will keep chasing moments that feel powerful while slowly giving up the stability that actually allows love to last. And that is the final truth inside all of this. People with avoidant patterns are not confusing because they lack depth. They are confusing because their depth often appears in fragments, in controlled moments, in intense flashes, in environments where they feel safe enough to let it come forward. But most people are not only looking for depth in flashes, they are looking for continuity across time. They are looking for something they can live inside, not just something they can feel inside one unforgettable moment. And intensity alone is not a foundation. It does not build trust by itself. It does not create stability by itself. It does not guarantee emotional availability. What it creates is an experience, sometimes a breathtaking one, sometimes one that feels rare, magnetic, once in a lifetime. But an experience is not the same thing as a reliable bond. So the real question is never only, did this feel strong? The real question is, can this be sustained? Because a connection that lives only in peaks will eventually drain you in the valleys. And once you understand the psychology behind that, you stop personalizing every withdrawal. You stop trying to earn clarity from someone who cannot yet offer it consistently. Most importantly, you stop leaving yourself behind just to keep hold of moments that were never meant to last longer than the moment itself. That is not about rejecting the other person. It is about choosing alignment over illusion. Real connection is not measured only by how deeply someone can meet you in a charged moment. It is measured by how consistently they can meet you in reality, in ordinary days, in honest conversations, in silence that does not feel like punishment, in closeness that does not vanish when the intensity fades. It is about emotional presence that remains when there is nothing dramatic happening. It is about safety, steadiness, repair, and truth. So if there is one thing to take from all of this, let it be this. Do not measure connection by how high it takes you. Measure it by how well it holds you. Do not ask only whether it felt powerful. Ask whether it feels clear. Ask whether it feels mutual. Ask whether it survives outside the peak. Because what you can build with someone will always matter more than what you can feel with them in one unforgettable rush. Intensity can be beautiful, it can be real, it can even change you, but without consistency, it remains a moment that does not know how to become a life. And that is why so many people break under these dynamics. Not because they loved too much, not because they felt too deeply, but because they kept trying to build a home out of emotional weather. If this gave language to something you have been living, sit with that. Notice what it changes in you. And remember this, the strongest connection is not the one that burns the hottest, it is the one that stays when the fire settles.